What happens when a man who once commanded respect from presidents and prime ministers finds himself scrubbing toilets at 3 in the morning? The fluorescent lights of Sterling and Associates flicker against polished marble floors as Henry Whitmore pushes his janitor's cart down the executive corridor. His weathered hands, once accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, now grip a mop handle with the same quiet dignity he once reserved for boardroom handshakes. At 72, his silver hair remains perfectly combed, his posture straight, despite the menial uniform that hangs loose on his diminished frame. 3 months ago, Henry Whitmore was a name whispered in the halls of power. Investment banker, political advisor, the man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. His Hamptons estate hosted senators and Supreme Court justices. His charity galas raised tens of millions. His word was bond, his reputation unassailable. Then came the scandal. The morning news anchors spoke his name like a curse as federal agents raided his offices. Fraud allegations, embezzlement charges, a Ponzi scheme that supposedly bilked retirees out of their life savings. The evidence seemed ironclad. Doctored documents, fabricated transactions, a paper trail that led directly to his desk. His assets were frozen within hours. His reputation incinerated by sunset, but Henry knew something the world didn't. Something that kept him calm as his empire collapsed, as his friends abandoned him, as his own lawyers suggested plea bargains. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when buried under mountains of manufactured evidence. And patience. Patience was a virtue he'd cultivated over 5 decades of navigating the treacherous waters of high finance. So when the court-appointed attorney suggested bankruptcy, Henry listened. When the judge ordered community service and restitution, Henry nodded. And when the only employment he could find was pushing a mop at Sterling and Associates, the very law firm that had once courted his business, Henry accepted with grace that puzzled everyone. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sterling and Associates had represented him during 3 hostile takeovers, had celebrated victories in his penthouse office, had charged him 7 figures for their expertise. Now he cleaned their conference rooms for minimum wage, invisible to the same lawyers who once fought for his attention. Henry's movements are methodical as he empties wastebaskets filled with the detritus of legal warfare, crumpled motions, discarded case files, half-eaten sandwiches from late-night strategy sessions. His keen eyes, still sharp despite his age, notice things. The names on documents, the whispered conversations, the familiar handwriting on sticky notes that shouldn't exist. Marcus Sterling, the firm's founding partner, passes Henry in the hallway without acknowledgement. The same man who once flew to Henry's vacation home in Aspen for weekend consultations now walks past as if Henry were furniture. But Henry sees the slight tremor in Marcus's hand, notices how his jaw tightens when certain case files cross his desk. The younger associates are different. They see Henry as entertainment. "Look who's here," whispers Jessica Chen, fresh from Harvard Law, as she spots Henry mopping near the elevator bank. Her voice carries the casual cruelty of privilege, the confidence of someone who's never faced real consequences. From the penthouse to the janitor's closet, Darwin was right about survival of the fittest. Her companions snicker. Brad Wellington, Sterling's golden boy, adjusts his $1,000 tie and grins. "My father always said Whitmore was a fraud. Guess the old man was right." He pulls out his phone, angling for a photo. "This is going straight to my LinkedIn." Karma in action, folks. Henry continues his work, each stroke of the mop deliberate and measured. He's learned to make himself small, invisible, beneath notice. But his ears are sharp, his memory sharper still. Every insult, every laugh, every cruel observation gets filed away in the mental ledger he's been keeping since his first day. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead as Henry empties the last trash bin on the executive floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawls below. A concrete jungle where fortunes rise and fall with the turning of pages, the signing of documents, the whispered words in shadowed corners. But tonight, As Henry locks his supply closet and heads for the service elevator, something feels different. The phone in his pocket, a cheap prepaid device, nothing like the encrypted satellite phone he once carried, vibrates once, then twice. The message is simple. Package delivered. Tiger Bay, midnight. Henry's weathered face betrays nothing as he reads the text. His thumb hovers over the delete button for a moment before he slides the phone back into his pocket. Tiger Bay. A name that would mean nothing to Jessica Chen or Brad Wellington or any of the other young sharks circling what they think is a dying fish. But Henry knows Tiger Bay. He knows what that name represents, who it connects to, and why that simple message changes everything. As the elevator descends toward the parking garage, Henry allows himself the faintest smile. The game isn't over. In fact, it's barely begun, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If this story reminds you of something you've experienced, workplace humiliation, the cruelty of those who've forgotten their humanity, share your experience in the comments. It might touch someone's heart today. Now take a deep breath and prepare yourself for a journey that might change how you see the world. The young lawyers think they're watching a broken man shuffle through his final act. What they don't realize is that Henry Whitmore has spent 3 months not just cleaning floors. He's been gathering intelligence. And tomorrow, when the real players make their move, these privileged predators will learn the difference between a man who's fallen and a man who's simply been lying in wait. The discovery happens on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray October day that makes fluorescent office lighting feel like a lifeline against the gloom pressing against Sterling and Associates' windows. Jessica Chen arrives early, her heels clicking against marble with the sharp precision of ambition. She's been working a securities fraud case, something routine, billable hours to pad her numbers, when she spots the name in an old case file, Henry Whitmore. The same Henry Whitmore who's been mopping these very floors for 3 months. Her perfectly manicured finger traces the document header. Sterling and Associates versus Meridian Holdings, representing Henry J. Whitmore, Chairman and CEO. The date stamp shows 18 months ago. The fee structure makes her eyes widen. $2 million in retainer, additional charges exceeding $8 million. "Oh my God," she whispers, then louder, "Oh my God." By 9 a.m., Jessica has assembled her audience in Conference Room B. Brad Wellington, Tyler Morrison from corporate law, and Sarah Kim from litigation. The case file spreads across the mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene. "This is him." Jessica's voice trembles with excitement. "Our janitor, Henry Whitmore, he paid this firm over $10 million in legal fees. Look at this. Private jets, Swiss bank accounts, congressional testimonies." She flips through photographs from society pages. That's him at the White House Easter egg roll. That's him shaking hands with the Secretary of Treasury. Brad leans back in his leather chair, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "From the halls of power to scrubbing our toilets. This is better than Christmas." Tyler, ever the strategist, pulls out his phone. "We need documentation, evidence. This story needs to be preserved for posterity." His fingers dance across the screen, pulling up news articles, court filings, the complete record of Henry's spectacular downfall. $300 million in losses, Sarah reads aloud. Pension funds wiped out, retirees forced back to work. The judge called him a cancer on the financial system. She looks up, eyes bright with malicious glee. "And now he empties our trash cans." They wait for Henry like hunters in a blind. At 10:30, Henry appears in the doorway, pushing his cart. The morning light streaming through the windows catches the silver in his hair, highlighting the lines of dignity that still mark his face despite everything. "Well, well," Brad announces loudly, "if it isn't our celebrity employee." Henry pauses, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly on the cart handle. "I'm sorry?" Jessica stands, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Henry J. Whitmore, former chairman of Whitmore Financial, net worth once estimated at $700 million. She begins a slow applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the presence of greatness. The mockery hits Henry like acid rain, slow, persistent, corrosive, but his expression remains neutral, his voice steady. I have work to do. Oh, but this is work. Tyler interjects, raising his phone to record. Entertainment value, morale booster for the troops, the cautionary tale of hubris walking among us in polyester uniform. Sarah joins the game, her voice dripping false sympathy. Tell us, Henry. May we call you Henry? What's it like, going from congressional hearings to cleaning toilets, from caviar to cafeteria food? Henry begins emptying the wastebasket beside the conference table. His movements remain methodical, professional. Everyone falls on hard times. Hard times? Brad's laughter fills the room. Henry, you didn't have hard times. You committed fraud, massive, systematic, generational fraud. You stole from widows and orphans. You're not a victim of circumstance. You're a criminal who got caught. The words hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. Henry continues his work, but something subtle shifts in his posture. A straightening of the spine, a slight lift of the chin. The courts determined my guilt, Henry says quietly. I accept their judgment. Jessica circles him now, emboldened by his apparent submission. Accept? Oh, Henry, that's beautiful. Such grace under pressure, such dignity in defeat. Her voice turns razored. But let's be honest, how does it feel to know that everyone you once called friend crossed the street to avoid you? How does it feel to know that your own wife changed her name and moved to Switzerland? Henry's hand stills on the trash bin. For just a moment, something flickers behind his eyes. Not pain, but something far more dangerous. Recognition, calculation. My wife made the choice she felt was best, Henry replies, his voice carrying a weight that makes Tyler lower his phone slightly. But Brad, high on cruelty, pushes further. The choice she felt was best? Henry, she didn't just leave you. She testified against you. She gave the FBI your personal files, your private communications, your... That's enough. The words come quietly, but with such absolute authority that the room falls silent. Henry straightens to his full height, and suddenly the cheap uniform seems less relevant. His eyes, pale blue and utterly calm, meet each of theirs in turn. I understand your entertainment, Henry continues, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and congressional committees. Young people often mistake cruelty for cleverness, but I would suggest respectfully that you're operating with incomplete information. Jessica recovers first, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Incomplete? The court records are public, Henry. Your crimes are documented. Your victims testified. What information could possibly be incomplete? Henry returns to his cart, begins moving toward the door. Nothing that concerns you, Miss Chen. Nothing at all. But as he reaches the threshold, he pauses. When he turns back, there's something different in his expression, not the broken resignation they've been tormenting, but something that makes Brad smirk falter slightly. Though I do wonder, Henry says conversationally, how well you've all researched the cases you're currently working on. Due diligence is so important in legal work, don't you think? The smallest overlooked detail can bring down the largest edifice. And then he's gone, leaving them staring at the empty doorway. Tyler is the first to speak. Did that sound like a threat to anyone else? Sarah laughs, but it's forced. What's he going to do? Mop us to death? But Jessica isn't laughing. Something in Henry's tone, in the way he'd used her full name without ever having been introduced, bothers her. She pulls out her phone, begins typing. What are you doing? Brad asks. Research, Jessica replies, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. If we're going to play this game, we need to know exactly who we're playing with. Outside in the hallway, Henry pushes his cart toward the elevators. His phone, the cheap prepaid device, vibrates once. The message is even simpler than yesterday's. Confirmed. They took the bait. Henry deletes the message and continues down the hall. Behind him, in conference room B, 4 young lawyers are about to discover that some games have rules they never learned and some opponents play by strategies they can't even imagine. The hunt has begun. But who exactly is the prey? The persecution becomes systematic, a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare that would make seasoned interrogators proud. It starts with the small cruelties, the kind that leave no visible marks but cut deep into the soul. Jessica Chen begins leaving her coffee cup in deliberate places where Henry will have to stretch awkwardly to reach it, her eyes tracking his movements with the clinical interest of a scientist studying lab rats. Brad Wellington develops a habit of accidentally knocking over trash cans just as Henry finishes emptying them, then watching with theatrical concern as the old man kneels to collect scattered papers. But it's Tyler Morrison who proves most creative in his malice. "You know what I love about this job?" Tyler announces to his colleagues as Henry mops nearby, his voice pitched to Carrie. "The life lessons. Take our friend Henry here, perfect example of how the universe corrects itself. Pride, they say, goes before the fall." Henry's movements never falter, the mop swishing across marble with metronomic precision. But Tyler isn't finished. "I've been reading about his case," Tyler continues, pulling out a thick folder. "Fascinating stuff. The testimonies are particularly illuminating." He opens to a marked page. "Here's his own wife under oath. My husband showed no remorse for his victims. He called them greedy fools who deserved what they got." The mop pauses for just a heartbeat, so brief that anyone not watching closely would miss it. But Tyler catches it, and his smile sharpens. "Oh, that hit home, didn't it, Henry? Your wife's words." Tyler's voice drops to a cruel whisper. "She also testified that you laughed when you read about Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, 83 years old, lost her entire retirement savings to your scheme, had to move in with her daughter, died of a heart attack 3 months later." Henry straightens slowly, his weathered hands still gripping the mop handle. When he speaks, his voice is steady, but carries an undertone that makes Sarah Kim look up from her laptop. "Mrs. Hartwell was a lovely woman," Henry says quietly. "She sent me Christmas cards for 15 years. Her granddaughter played violin." Tyler blinks, momentarily thrown by the unexpected response. "What?" "Amelia, Mrs. Hartwell's granddaughter. She played violin. Mozart was her favorite composer, though she struggled with the faster passages." Henry's pale eyes fix on Tyler with disturbing intensity. "She performed at Carnegie Hall when she was 14, full scholarship to Juilliard." The room falls silent. There's something in Henry's tone, not the broken rambling of a defeated man, but the precise recall of someone with an extraordinary memory for detail. Jessica recovers first. How do you know that?" Henry returns to his mopping. "I make it my business to know things about people who matter to me." "Matter to you?" Brad's voice cracks slightly. "You stole her grandmother's money." "I've never stolen anything in my life," Henry replies, with such quiet conviction that for a moment the accusation hangs in the air like a challenged verdict. Then he continues cleaning, and the spell breaks. But Tyler, emboldened by Henry's apparent vulnerability, decides to twist the knife deeper. "You know what I think, Henry? I think you're in denial. Complete psychological breakdown. Can't face the truth of what you are." He begins reading from his phone, his voice taking on the theatrical cadence of a courtroom drama. Federal prosecutor's closing statement. "Henry Whitmore is a predator who targeted the vulnerable, a man whose greed knew no bounds, whose lies destroyed lives across 3 generations of American families." With each word, Tyler watches Henry's face, searching for cracks in the composure. But Henry simply continues his work, methodical and unhurried. "Here's my favorite part," Tyler continues. "The defendant showed a pattern of sophisticated manipulation, using his reputation and political connections to gain access to victims' trust before systematically looting their accounts." Henry empties the last wastebasket in the room, but instead of leaving, he pauses beside Tyler's chair. Up close, Tyler notices details he'd missed before. The precise knot of Henry's tie, despite his janitor's uniform, the expensive watch still on his wrist, the way he carries himself with unconscious authority. "Mr. Morrison," Henry says, using Tyler's name for the first time, "may I ask what you know about sophisticated manipulation?" Tyler's confidence wavers slightly. "I'm sorry? It's a professional interest," Henry explains, his tone conversational. "You see, I've spent considerable time studying human behavior, the psychology of persuasion, how to read people, understand their motivations, predict their actions." He pauses, studying Tyler's face with clinical detachment. "For instance, I know that you're the son of Thomas Morrison, senior partner at Morrison, Keller and Associates. I know that you graduated bottom third of your class at Georgetown, got this job through your father's connections, and are currently being investigated by the Bar Association for billing irregularities." Tyler's face drains of color. "How do you... I also know that you've been skimming hours from junior associates' timesheets and billing them as your own work. Approximately $47,000 in fraudulent charges over the past 8 months. Henry's voice remains perfectly calm, almost gentle. "So when you speak of manipulation and fraud, I find myself wondering about your qualifications to judge such things." The silence stretches like a held breath. Tyler's mouth opens and closes soundlessly, his carefully constructed cruelty crumbling in the face of impossible knowledge. Jessica, always quick to recover, tries to regain control. "You're bluffing. You're a janitor. You have no access to..." "Miss Chen," Henry interrupts, turning his attention to her. "You filed a motion last week claiming 8 hours of research on the Brennan case. But the law library access logs show you were there for 97 minutes. The difference was spent at Saks Fifth Avenue, purchasing a handbag that cost more than most people's monthly salary." Jessica's hand instinctively moves to her purse, the very handbag Henry mentioned. "Mr. Wellington," Henry continues, his gaze shifting to Brad, "you've been providing confidential client information to your girlfriend, who works for a competing firm. Ethics violation. Grounds for disbarment. This could destroy your entire career." Brad's face has gone ashen. "You can't prove any of that." "And Miss Kim," Henry says, completing his circuit, "you've been conducting your own private practice on company time, using Sterling and Associates resources for personal clients. Tax evasion, breach of fiduciary duty, also grounds for disbarment." The 4 young lawyers stare at him in stunned silence, their world suddenly tilted on its axis. The broken old man they'd been tormenting has just demonstrated knowledge that should be impossible, delivering accusations with surgical precision. Henry straightens, adjusting his uniform with the same care he once reserved for $1,000 suits. "You see, children, there are different types of power in this world. The kind you think you have, position, privilege, connections, is temporary. It can be taken away by judges, by circumstances, by the shifting winds of fortune." He moves toward the door, pushing his cart with unhurried dignity. "But the kind of power that comes from knowing where bodies are buried, from understanding the intricate web of secrets that bind people together, that kind of power is forever." At the threshold, he pauses one final time. "Oh, and Tyler? Your father's affair with his secretary ended 6 months ago, but the photographs still exist. I wonder how your mother would feel about seeing them." The door closes behind Henry with a soft click, leaving 4 young lawyers sitting in a conference room that suddenly feels very small and very cold. In the hallway, Henry's phone buzzes. The message is longer this time. "Phase 2 authorized. All packages delivered. Awaiting your signal." Henry types back a single word. "Soon." He deletes the exchange and continues down the corridor, his footsteps echoing against marble that suddenly seems less like a floor and more like the foundation of something much larger and more dangerous than anyone realized. The game has changed. The hunters have become the hunted. And Henry Whitmore, patient, methodical, apparently broken Henry Whitmore, has just shown his teeth. The phone call happens at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday that will forever divide the young lawyer's understanding of their world into before and after. Henry is restocking paper towels in the 20th floor men's room when the cheap prepaid phone in his pocket rings. The sound is jarring in the marble-tiled silence, a harsh electronic buzz that seems to cut through the building's expensive quiet like a blade through silk. He glances at the screen. The number is blocked, but he recognizes the pattern of digits. His weathered finger hesitates over the accept button for just a moment, then slides across the screen. "Tiger Bay," he says quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The response comes in a voice that carries the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Package delivered. The senator is asking questions. Time to move. Henry closes his eyes, feeling the weight of months of preparation settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. How long do we have? 72 hours before the first domino falls. After that, it's a cascade. Everything connected to Meridian Holdings gets pulled into the light. And the others? Positioned and ready. Chen's banking records, Wellington's communications, Morrison's falsified documents, all sitting in the right hands, waiting for your word. Henry opens his eyes, studying his reflection in the restroom mirror. The man staring back wears a janitor's uniform and carries the weight of supposed disgrace, but his eyes hold the steady calculation of someone who has never truly been defeated. What about Sterling? Marcus Sterling is currently in a closed-door meeting with FBI agent Patricia Reeves. She's asking very specific questions about Whitmore Financial's legal representation and the timing of certain document transfers. A ghost of a smile crosses Henry's face. "Excellent. Maintain surveillance. I'll signal when it's time." "Roger that, Phoenix. Good hunting." The line goes dead, leaving Henry alone with the sound of his own breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Phoenix, a code name he hasn't heard in 18 months, from a time when he was someone else entirely. He pockets the phone and returns to his supplies, but his movements now carry a different energy, the coiled tension of a predator preparing to strike. 3 floors below, in Conference Room B, the 4 young lawyers are struggling with the aftermath of Henry's revelations. The easy camaraderie of shared cruelty has evaporated, replaced by suspicious glances and uncomfortable silences. Tyler Morrison stares at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking mockingly in an empty document. Every time he tries to focus on his work, Henry's words echo in his mind. "Your father's affair with his secretary. The photographs still exist. We need to do something," Jessica says finally, breaking the tense quiet. "This is insane. He's a janitor, a convicted felon. He can't know the things he claims to know." Brad looks up from his phone, where he's been frantically deleting text messages. "Can't he? How do we know what resources he still has access to? How do we know who he's still connected to?" "Because he's cleaning toilets," Sarah snaps, but her voice lacks conviction. "If he had real power, real connections, would he be here? Would he be enduring what we've put him through?" The question hangs in the air like smoke from a fire that won't be extinguished. They all know people with connections, judges, politicians, business leaders. None of those people would suffer humiliation in silence. None of them would push a mop cart through corridors where they once commanded respect. Unless, what if it's an act? Tyler's voice is barely audible, but the words hit the room like a physical blow. What if everything we've seen is theater? What if he's here for a reason? Jessica laughs, but it's hollow. Conspiracy theories, Tyler. Really? What's next? Are you going to tell us he's a secret agent? But even as she says it, the pieces begin shifting in her mind. Henry's impossible knowledge of their personal lives, his calm under pressure, the way he'd spoken about Mrs. Hartwell's granddaughter, not the vague recollections of a guilty conscience, but the precise details of someone who made it his business to know. "I'm going to find out," Jessica declares, standing abruptly. I'm going to research every aspect of his case, every document, every witness statement. If there's something we're missing, I'll find it. She gathers her laptop and files, but as she reaches the door, she nearly collides with Henry himself. He's entering with his cart, the same methodical precision he's shown every day for 3 months. "Excuse me," he says politely, but something in his tone makes her study his face more carefully. There's a tension around his eyes she hasn't noticed before, a slight tightness that speaks of someone making calculations. "Henry," she says, her voice carrying a lawyer's probing edge. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about incomplete information." Henry continues setting up his cleaning supplies, but she catches the almost imperceptible pause when he handles the spray bottle. "Yes? I'm wondering what you meant by that. What information could possibly change the facts of your case? The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was clear. Your own wife testified against you." Henry straightens slowly, and when he meets her gaze, there's something different in his expression. Not the resignation they've grown accustomed to, but something that makes her take an involuntary step backward. "Miss Chen," he says quietly, "what do you know about intelligence operations?" The question is so unexpected that she blinks in confusion. Intelligence operations? Specifically about deep cover assignments, about the kind of work that requires someone to maintain a false identity for years, sometimes decades, about sacrifices that agents make for their country. Tyler's laugh is nervous, forced. "You're not seriously suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Mr. Morrison. I'm simply asking if you understand the concept. If you realize that sometimes, in the world of national security, the most valuable asset is someone who appears to have lost everything." The room falls silent except for the whisper of Henry's cloth against the conference table surface. His movements are hypnotic, methodical, but his words carry weight that makes the air feel thick. You see, when you're investigating financial crimes that reach into the highest levels of government, when you're tracking money that flows through shell companies and offshore accounts, when you're trying to identify the real puppet masters behind elaborate schemes, sometimes you need to become the perfect bait. Sarah's voice is barely a whisper. "What are you saying?" Henry pauses in his cleaning, his pale eyes fixing on each of them in turn. "I'm saying that sometimes the best way to catch a wolf is to appear to be wounded prey, to make yourself so attractive a target that the real predators can't resist revealing themselves." He returns to his work, but his next words drop into the silence like stones into still water. "I'm saying that Whitmore Financial wasn't the crime, Miss Chen. It was the cover story, and after 18 months of investigation, we finally have enough evidence to bring down the real criminals." The spray bottle in his hand catches the light, and for a moment, Jessica could swear she sees something clipped to his belt beneath the janitor's uniform. Something small and electronic that definitely doesn't belong on a cleaning cart. Henry moves toward the door, but this time his departure feels different, less like retreat and more like a predator returning to position. "Oh, and children?" He pauses at the threshold, his back to them. "You might want to check the news in about an hour. I believe there's going to be a very interesting press conference." The door closes behind him with a soft click, leaving 4 young lawyers staring at each other in a conference room that suddenly feels less like their territory and more like a trap that's been slowly closing around them for months. Outside in the corridor, Henry's phone buzzes with a final message. "Press conference confirmed. Senator Morrison publicly announces investigation into judicial corruption. Your son's name is on the list." Henry deletes the message and continues down the hall, his cartwheels squeaking against marble that now sounds less like flooring and more like the final notes of a symphony that's been playing for longer than anyone realized. The first crack has appeared in their certainty. Now it's time to watch their world crumble completely. The press conference begins at 4:15 p.m., streaming live on every major news network. Senator Patricia Morrison, Tyler's own aunt, steps up to a podium bristling with microphones, her expression carved from granite. Today, the Senate Intelligence Committee announces the successful conclusion of Operation Phoenix. She begins, her voice carrying the weight of 18 months of carefully orchestrated deception. This investigation has uncovered the largest judicial corruption scandal in American history. In Conference Room B, 4 young lawyers watch the screen with mounting horror as their understanding of reality crumbles like a house built on sand. For the past 2 years, Senator Morrison continues, federal agents have been investigating a network of corrupt judges, prosecutors, and attorneys who have been manipulating the judicial system for personal gain. This network has fixed verdicts, falsified evidence, and destroyed innocent lives while enriching themselves through elaborate financial schemes. Tyler's face has gone ashen. His aunt, his father's sister, the woman who bounced him on her knee as a child, is announcing an investigation that he somehow knows will destroy everything his family has built. The investigation required unprecedented cooperation between the FBI, the Treasury Department, and various intelligence agencies. It also required someone willing to sacrifice everything, their reputation, their freedom, their very identity, to serve as the perfect deep cover operative. Jessica's hands tremble as she reaches for her phone, but the device feels foreign in her grasp. Everything she thought she knew about Henry Whitmore, about his crimes, about his fall from grace, is dissolving before her eyes. That operative, Senator Morrison says, her voice carrying a note of profound respect, voluntarily subjected himself to public disgrace, federal prosecution, and complete social exile. He endured 18 months of imprisonment, humiliation, and isolation, all while gathering the evidence that will today bring justice to victims across the nation. The camera pulls back to reveal a second figure stepping up to the podium, FBI Director James Crawford, a man whose face has graced magazine covers and congressional hearings for the past decade. Special Agent Henry Whitmore, Crawford announces, has been working undercover for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the past 23 years. His apparent career as an investment banker was, in fact, the longest-running deep-cover operation in Bureau history. The words hit the conference room like a physical blow. Sarah drops her coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking bones. Agent Whitmore's supposed criminal enterprise was actually an elaborate honey trap designed to attract corrupt officials who sought to profit from insider information and judicial manipulation. Every transaction, every meeting, every apparent crime was carefully documented and recorded. Tyler's phone begins buzzing incessantly. Calls, texts, news alerts cascading across the screen in a torrent of information that his mind can't process. His father's name appears in headline after headline, each notification another nail in the coffin of his family's reputation. The evidence gathered through Operation Phoenix has resulted in sealed indictments against 47 individuals, including 3 federal judges, 12 prosecutors, 8 state legislators, and numerous attorneys who participated in this criminal conspiracy. Brad's girlfriend, the one Henry mentioned, the one at the competing firm, appears on his phone screen, calling frantically. But he can't answer, can't move, can't breathe as the implications crash over him like a tsunami. Director Crawford continues, his voice clinical in its precision. Agent Whitmore endured public hatred, lost his marriage, sacrificed his health, and submitted to imprisonment, all while maintaining his cover and gathering evidence that will now deliver justice to thousands of victims. The supposed victims of Whitmore Financial, Senator Morrison adds, returning to the podium, were actually part of the operation. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, whose testimony proved so compelling during Agent Whitmore's trial, was a retired FBI analyst who volunteered for the assignment. Her granddaughter's violin performance was code that confirmed the successful placement of surveillance equipment in targeted locations. Jessica makes a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Every cruel word she'd spoken about Mrs. Hartwell, every moment of supposed moral superiority, had been based on a lie she'd swallowed completely. Agent Whitmore's apparent fall from grace was so convincing that it attracted exactly the criminals we sought to identify. Corrupt officials reached out to him, believing him desperate enough to become their asset. Instead, he became their downfall. The camera focuses on Director Crawford as he holds up a thick folder. This investigation has exposed a network that spans from municipal courts to the Supreme Court, from state capitals to Congress itself. The evidence is comprehensive, irrefutable, and devastating. Tyler finally manages to answer his phone. His father's voice comes through the speaker, shaky and desperate. "Tyler, you need to come home immediately. There are federal agents here. They have warrants. The line goes dead. The criminal network operated by recruiting assets within law firms, Senator Morrison explains, and Jessica feels ice forming in her veins. They targeted young attorneys who could be compromised through their own ethical violations, then used those compromised individuals to manipulate cases, steal information, and corrupt judicial proceedings. Sarah's laptop screen fills with news alerts about Sterling and Associates. The firm's name appears in article after article, described as a key node in the corruption network. Partners' photos appear alongside words like conspiracy, racketeering, and criminal enterprise. Sterling and Associates, Director Crawford announces with devastating clarity, served as a central hub for document falsification, evidence tampering, and judicial bribery. The firm's partners knowingly participated in fixing verdicts, suppressing evidence, and obstructing justice across multiple jurisdictions. Brad's phone rings, his father calling from the family law firm. But the screen also shows news alerts about Morrison, Keller and Associates being raided by federal agents. Tyler's family firm, the foundation of his identity and privilege, is collapsing in real time. Agent Whitmore's assignment to work at Sterling and Associates as custodial staff was the final phase of the operation, Senator Morrison reveals. This position allowed him to document the firm's ongoing criminal activities and gather evidence of their role in the broader conspiracy. Jessica realizes with crystalline clarity that every cruel comment, every mocking laugh, every moment of sadistic pleasure they derived from Henry's apparent degradation had been witnessed and recorded by someone working for the FBI, someone who had been gathering evidence of their crimes while they congratulated themselves on their superiority. The young attorneys who participated in these schemes, Director Crawford continues, often began with minor ethical violations, falsifying timesheets, sharing confidential information, misrepresenting facts to clients. The criminal network then used these compromises to force deeper participation in more serious crimes. Tyler's hands shake as he realizes that Henry's impossible knowledge of their individual crimes wasn't mysterious at all. It was the product of months of professional surveillance, documented evidence, recorded conversations. Everything they'd done, every corner they'd cut, every ethical line they'd crossed, it was all in Henry's files. We estimate that this corruption network has affected over 3,000 cases, stolen approximately $400 million, and destroyed countless lives through manipulated verdicts and suppressed evidence, Senator Morrison states with quiet fury. The screen splits to show federal agents leading Marcus Sterling himself out of the building in handcuffs. The man who once commanded respect and fear walks past cameras with his head down, his expensive suit rumpled, his reputation incinerated. Agent Whitmore's sacrifice, Director Crawford concludes, represents the finest tradition of federal law enforcement. He gave up everything, his public reputation, his personal relationships, his freedom to serve justice and protect the American people. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the conference room door opens. Henry Whitmore enters, but he's no longer wearing the janitor's uniform. Instead, he's dressed in a crisp navy suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his bearing transformed from humble custodian to federal agent. The cheap prepaid phone is gone, replaced by a sophisticated communication device clipped to his belt. The submissive posture has vanished, replaced by the confident stance of someone accustomed to authority. "Good afternoon," Henry says, his voice carrying none of the deferential tone they've grown accustomed to. "I believe you've been watching the news." Jessica tries to speak, but can only manage a strangled whisper. You're Special Agent Henry Whitmore, Federal Bureau of Investigation, badge number 1247, 23 years of service, the last 18 months of which I've spent documenting your crimes." He moves to the conference table, where they've spent months tormenting him. But now his presence fills the room with an authority that makes them all shrink in their chairs. "Jessica Chen, you're under arrest for falsifying legal documents, billing fraud, and participating in a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice." His voice is professional, clinical. "Bradley Wellington, you're under arrest for sharing confidential client information, ethical violations, and money laundering through fraudulent billing practices." The words wash over them like Arctic water. Tyler tries to stand, but his legs won't support him. Sarah makes a choking sound that might be an attempt at protest. "Tyler Morrison, you're under arrest for document falsification, billing fraud, and conspiracy to commit judicial corruption. Sarah Kim, you're under arrest for operating an illegal practice, tax evasion, and racketeering conspiracy." Henry, Agent Whitmore, checks his watch with the same methodical precision he once used to empty their trash cans. "Federal agents are currently executing search warrants on your homes, your offices, and your financial accounts. Your communications have been monitored, your movements tracked, your crimes documented, with the kind of detail that makes conviction inevitable." Through the conference room windows, they can see federal agents moving through Sterling and Associates like a precision instrument dismantling a machine. Partners and associates alike are being led away in handcuffs, their careers ending with the click of metal around their wrists. "You spent months believing you were humiliating a broken man," Agent Whitmore continues, his pale eyes moving from face to face. "In reality, you were providing evidence for your own prosecution. Every cruel comment, every mocking laugh, every moment of sadistic pleasure, all recorded, all documented, all admissible in court." He moves toward the door but pauses at the threshold. The janitor's uniform was remarkably effective camouflage. He says with what might be the faintest smile, "Amazing how invisible a man becomes when people believe he's beneath their notice." The door opens to reveal 4 federal agents waiting in the corridor. They enter the conference room with practiced efficiency, handcuffs gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You have the right to remain silent." The lead agent begins, but her words are nearly drowned out by Tyler's sobbing and Jessica's attempts to negotiate through tears. Agent Whitmore watches from the doorway as the young lawyers who spent months destroying what they thought was a broken man are themselves broken in the span of minutes. Justice, he reflects, has its own sense of poetry. The arrests happen with the choreographed precision of a symphony conducted by someone who has spent 18 months learning every note, every rhythm, every crescendo of corruption. Jessica Chen's penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side swarms with federal agents at exactly 5:47 p.m. They move through her space like surgical instruments, each item they bag and tag representing another thread in the web of evidence Agent Whitmore has been weaving. The Hermes handbag she bought with stolen billable hours sits on her marble kitchen counter, its price tag still visible in the FBI photographs that will soon grace a federal courtroom. Her neighbor, Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, a 78-year-old widow who waters her plants on the balcony each morning, watches through her window as Jessica is led away in handcuffs. What Mrs. Thornton doesn't know is that she too has been part of Agent Whitmore's operation for the past 6 months. Her innocent observations about Jessica's spending habits and erratic schedule carefully documented in FBI surveillance reports. 3 blocks away, Brad Wellington's world collapses with similar precision. Federal agents arrive at his family's Connecticut estate just as his father, Supreme Court Justice Robert Wellington, is hosting a dinner party for influential donors. The irony is not lost on Agent Patricia Reeves, who presents the warrant to Justice Wellington with professional courtesy that barely masks 18 months of carefully controlled rage. "Your son has been under federal surveillance for the past year," Agent Reeves informs the justice, whose face has drained of all color. "His communications with your clerk's office, his access to sealed case information, his coordination with corrupt attorneys, all documented, all recorded, all admissible." Justice Wellington's hand trembles as he reaches for his brandy, but Agent Reeves continues with relentless precision. "We also have evidence of your own participation, Your Honor. The Meridian Holdings case that passed through your chambers last year. The one where you recused yourself after Agent Whitmore's apparent conviction. You received $200,000 through your son's account the day before that recusal. The dinner guests, senators, federal judges, corporate executives, sit frozen around the mahogany table as federal agents photograph everything from the antique silverware to the offshore banking statements hidden in Justice Wellington's private study. Brad himself is arrested at his girlfriend's apartment, where he'd fled hoping to destroy evidence. But Agent Whitmore's network has been 3 steps ahead for months. The girlfriend, Assistant District Attorney Monica Sterling, Marcus Sterling's daughter, has herself been under surveillance, her own corruption documented through recorded conversations about fixed cases and suppressed evidence. The phone calls you thought were private, Agent Sarah Kim, yes, another Agent Kim, whose undercover assignment at the district attorney's office ran parallel to Whitmore's operation, explains to the arrested couple. The encrypted messages you sent about manipulating witness testimony, the meetings you held in hotel rooms you thought were secure, all monitored, all recorded, all part of a federal investigation that's been building evidence against you for over a year. Tyler Morrison's arrest unfolds with particular poetic justice. Federal agents arrive at Morrison, Keller and Associates, just as Tyler's father, Thomas Morrison, is shredding documents in his corner office. The sound of the shredder masks the approach of Agent David Chen, Jessica's own brother, whose undercover work as a paralegal at the firm has provided months of inside intelligence. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Chen announces, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has watched corruption destroy lives from the inside. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit judicial bribery, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." Thomas Morrison's face cycles through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation as he realizes the scope of the operation that has been closing around him. "My son," he whispers, "what about Tyler?" "Tyler is being processed at Federal Plaza." Agent Chen replies with professional detachment. Along with his co-conspirators from Sterling and Associates, the same young lawyers who thought they were tormenting a broken janitor while actually providing evidence for their own prosecution. The documents Thomas Morrison was attempting to destroy tell the story of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of state government. Shell companies, offshore accounts, payments disguised as consulting fees, all connecting back to the network that Agent Whitmore's operation was designed to expose. But it's Sarah Kim's downfall that demonstrates the true sophistication of the federal operation. She's arrested not at home or at work, but at the private clinic where she's been conducting her illegal side practice, a clinic that federal agents reveal has been operating as a front for money laundering operations connected to the judicial corruption network. Dr. Marcus Hoffman, the clinic's supposed owner, removes his medical coat to reveal the FBI badge underneath. "Special Agent Marcus Hoffman," he announces to the stunned Sarah Kim. "I've been documenting your illegal practice, your tax evasion, and your participation in laundering money from corrupt legal verdicts for the past 8 months. The clinic itself, patients, staff, even the medical equipment has been an elaborate federal sting operation. Every illegal consultation Sarah conducted, every unreported payment she received, every tax law she violated has been witnessed and recorded by federal agents posing as medical personnel. The clients you thought were desperate immigrants needing legal help," Agent Hoffman continues as handcuffs click around Sarah's wrists. "Undercover federal agents gathering evidence of your willingness to commit fraud for personal gain." Back at Sterling and Associates, the building has become a federal crime scene. Agent Whitmore stands in the marble lobby where he once pushed a janitor's cart. But now he wears the Navy suit and federal badge that represent his true identity. Around him, FBI forensic accountants work with the efficiency of archaeologists, uncovering layer after layer of financial corruption. Marcus Sterling himself sits in the same conference room where his young associates once mocked Agent Whitmore, but now Sterling faces a different kind of audience. Assistant Director Jennifer Walsh, the FBI's top white-collar crime investigator, spreads documents across the mahogany table with methodical precision. 18 months ago, when you agreed to represent Henry Whitmore, you thought you were getting the biggest fee payday of your career, Director Walsh explains, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. $2 million in retainer, $8 million in additional charges. What you didn't realize was that every dollar came from FBI operational funds, and every transaction was designed to establish your participation in money laundering. Sterling's expensive suit can't hide the tremor in his hands as he realizes the scope of his miscalculation. "You can't prove I knew—" "Mr. Sterling," Director Walsh interrupts, "we have recordings of you coordinating with corrupt judges to fix verdicts. We have documentation of your participation in evidence suppression. We have financial records showing your receipt of bribes disguised as consulting fees." She pauses, studying his face with clinical interest. "We have 18 months of evidence gathered by an agent you humiliated, an operation you never suspected, and a network of corruption you thought was untouchable." The forensic accountants work around them, their computers humming as they trace financial transactions through shell companies and offshore accounts. Each transaction represents another thread in the web of corruption, another life destroyed by judicial manipulation, another family devastated by fixed verdicts. Agent Whitmore enters the conference room, and Sterling looks up with the expression of a man seeing his own executioner. "Henry," Sterling whispers, using the name of the broken janitor he thought he knew. "Special Agent Whitmore," comes the correction, delivered with quiet authority. "And Mr. Sterling, you have the right to remain silent." As Sterling is led away in handcuffs, Agent Whitmore allows himself a moment of reflection in the empty conference room. The marble table where he was mocked and humiliated now serves as a processing station for evidence that will destroy the careers and lives of those who thought cruelty was consequence-free. His phone, no longer the cheap prepaid device, but a sophisticated federal communication system, chimes with updates from operations across the city. 47 arrests in a single afternoon. Hundreds of corrupted cases being reviewed. Thousands of victims finally receiving the justice they deserved. The janitor's cart still sits in the supply closet where he left it this morning, but Agent Whitmore will never push it again. His cover is blown, his mission complete, his sacrifice finally vindicated. Outside the conference room windows, federal agents escort a steady stream of arrested lawyers, judges, and corrupt officials to waiting vehicles. Each handcuffed figure represents a victory for the system they sought to corrupt, a triumph of patient justice over immediate gratification. Agent Whitmore straightens his tie, the same gesture he made every morning as a janitor, but now carrying the authority of someone whose true power has finally been revealed. The tables haven't just turned, They've been completely reconstructed, with justice sitting firmly in the place of honor. The hunter has become the hunted, the victim has become the victor, and the man they thought was broken has proven himself unbreakable. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan has become the stage for a different kind of theater. One where the audience watches justice unfold with the methodical precision of a master craftsman completing his finest work. Jessica Chen sits at the defendant's table in courtroom 7A, her designer suits replaced by the standard-issue clothing of someone whose assets have been frozen pending trial. The woman who once mocked Agent Whitmore's fall from grace now faces her own descent into disgrace, with every sordid detail of her corruption broadcast across legal news networks. The defendant, federal prosecutor Maria Santos, announces to the jury, used her position of trust to steal over $47,000 in billable hours while simultaneously sharing confidential client information with criminal conspirators. Santos pauses, letting the weight of the charges settle in the silent courtroom. She believed herself untouchable, protected by privilege and connections. She was wrong. In the gallery, Agent Whitmore sits quietly, no longer the broken janitor, but a federal witness whose testimony has already secured convictions against 12 corrupt officials. His presence serves as a constant reminder of how thoroughly Jessica misjudged her victim. The evidence against Jessica unfolds like a roadmap of arrogance and greed. Surveillance footage shows her shopping at Saks Fifth Avenue during hours she billed to clients. Audio recordings capture her coordinating with corrupt prosecutors to suppress evidence. Financial records trace payments from shell companies controlled by the Judicial Corruption Network directly into her personal accounts. Your Honor, Jessica's court-appointed attorney pleads during sentencing, my client was young, impressionable, led astray by more senior criminals. Judge Eleanor Hartwell, yes, the same Mrs. Hartwell whose supposed suffering Jessica once mocked, interrupts with quiet authority. Counselor, the defendant is 32 years old. She graduated from Harvard Law School. She passed the state bar examination. At what point does ignorance of right and wrong cease to be an excuse? The irony is exquisite. Jessica is being sentenced by the woman she believed was a fraud victim, whose granddaughter's violin performances she ridiculed, whose Christmas cards she dismissed as evidence of Henry's callousness. Judge Hartwell's presence on the bench represents the final revelation of how completely Jessica misunderstood every aspect of the situation. The court sentences Jessica Chen to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Additionally, the defendant will forfeit all assets obtained through criminal activity and pay restitution in the amount of $237,000. Jessica's breakdown is complete and public. The woman who once commanded respect from colleagues and clients is led away in handcuffs. Her legal career ended, her reputation destroyed, her future reduced to a prison cell and the eternal shame of her documented cruelty. 3 courtrooms away, Brad Wellington faces his own reckoning. The golden boy of Sterling and Associates sits beside his father, former Supreme Court Justice Robert Wellington, as both men confront the destruction of a family legacy built over generations. The Wellington family, Prosecutor David Kim, yes, Agent Chen's brother, now revealed as a federal prosecutor who spent months building these cases, addresses the packed courtroom. Believe their name and connections place them above the law. They use the highest court in the land as a personal profit center, selling justice to the highest bidder. The evidence against Brad is overwhelming. Recorded conversations with his father discussing fixed verdicts, financial records showing bribes disguised as consulting fees, documented coordination with corrupt attorneys to manipulate case outcomes. But it's the personal evidence that destroys him most completely. Surveillance footage of him mocking Agent Whitmore, recordings of his cruel laughter, documentation of his participation in psychological torture. The defendant, Prosecutor Kim continues, spent months deriving pleasure from the apparent suffering of a man he believed was beneath him. In reality, he was providing evidence of his own moral bankruptcy to a federal agent gathering intelligence on judicial corruption. Justice Wellington's own trial runs concurrently, father and son facing the consequences of their shared corruption. The man who once commanded respect from presidents and foreign leaders now sits as a defendant, his black robes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his gavel exchanged for handcuffs. You have brought disgrace not only upon yourself and your family, Judge Patricia Morrison, Senator Morrison's sister, Tyler's aunt, tells the former Supreme Court Justice, but upon the very institution you swore to protect. Your corruption has tainted every decision you made, called into question every verdict you influenced, and violated the trust of every American who believed in the integrity of our judicial system. The sentences are devastating. Brad receives 12 years in federal prison. His father gets 15 years, plus the forfeiture of his entire estate. The Wellington family name, once synonymous with judicial integrity, becomes a cautionary tale taught in law schools as an example of how corruption destroys everything it touches. Tyler Morrison's trial becomes a study in how privilege cannot protect against the consequences of documented crimes. His father's firm, Morrison, Keller and Associates, has been dissolved, its assets seized, its reputation incinerated. 3 generations of legal tradition reduced to a federal case study in corruption. The defendant, Prosecutor Elizabeth Reeves announces, believed his family connections made him untouchable. His aunt sits in the United States Senate. His father commanded respect in legal circles. His grandfather founded one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. She pauses, studying Tyler's ashen face. None of that matters when weighed against documented evidence of criminal conspiracy. Tyler's personal recordings prove his downfall. Audio captured by Agent Whitmore's surveillance equipment as Tyler read cruel testimony aloud, mocking supposed victims who were actually federal agents. The court hears Tyler's voice laughing about Mrs. Hartwell's supposed heart attack, ridiculing Agent Whitmore's apparent fall from grace, taking sadistic pleasure in psychological cruelty. The defendant's character, Judge Marcus Chen, Agent David Chen's father, whose appointment to the federal bench was delayed until after the operation concluded, observes during sentencing, is revealed not in moments of public scrutiny, but in how he treats those he believes are powerless to respond. Tyler receives 10 years in federal prison, his law license permanently revoked, his family's legal dynasty ended in disgrace. His father, Thomas Morrison, facing his own trial for judicial bribery and conspiracy, can only watch as the empire he built crumbles around his son's handcuffed wrists. But it's Sarah Kim's reckoning that demonstrates the most complete destruction. Her illegal practice has exposed a money laundering operation that reached into immigrant communities, preying on the most vulnerable members of society while disguising criminal proceeds as legitimate legal fees. The defendant, Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh announces in the packed courtroom, used her legal education to exploit vulnerable immigrants while simultaneously laundering money for a criminal conspiracy that corrupted our courts. She turned the law into a weapon against those who needed protection most. The evidence includes heartbreaking testimony from real immigrants who trusted Sarah with their legal problems, only to discover that their cases were never filed, their payments were stolen, and their hope for legal status was sacrificed to Sarah's greed. Agent Hoffman's recordings capture Sarah dismissing their concerns, laughing about their desperation, treating their suffering as entertainment. The court, Judge Amanda Reeves, Agent Patricia Reeves' sister, announces during sentencing, finds the defendant's actions particularly reprehensible because they targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. She weaponized her legal training against those who needed protection most, Sarah receives 14 years in federal prison, the longest sentence of all 4 defendants. Her illegal practice has been shuttered, her clients' cases transferred to legitimate attorneys, and her law license revoked permanently. The woman who once participated in mocking Agent Whitmore's apparent powerlessness now faces her own complete powerlessness in the federal prison system. The final courtroom scene involves Marcus Sterling himself, the founding partner whose firm served as the hub for the entire corruption network. His trial has revealed the scope of judicial manipulation that reaches back over a decade, affecting thousands of cases and destroying countless lives. Sterling and Associates, prosecutor Maria Santos tells the jury, operated as a criminal enterprise disguised as a law firm. They fixed verdicts, suppressed evidence, bribed judges, and corrupted the judicial process for profit. Sterling's defense attempts to portray him as a victim of ambitious subordinates, but the evidence is overwhelming. Agent Whitmore's 18 months of surveillance have captured Sterling coordinating bribes, discussing fixed verdicts, and celebrating the manipulation of justice like a sport. The defendant, Judge Eleanor Hartwell observes during Sterling's sentencing hearing, created a culture of corruption that infected everyone who worked under his supervision. He turned his law firm into a criminal conspiracy and his employees into unwitting accomplices. Sterling receives 25 years in federal prison, his firm's assets seized, his legal legacy reduced to a federal case study in organized crime. The marble corridors where Agent Whitmore once pushed a janitor's cart now serve as offices for federal prosecutors processing the cases of Sterling's victims. In the gallery of each courtroom, Agent Whitmore watches quietly as justice unfolds with the precision he planned for 18 months. The man they mocked as powerless has orchestrated the destruction of their lives with the methodical patience of someone who understands that true power doesn't announce itself. It simply acts when the moment is right. The janitor's uniform hangs in an FBI evidence locker now, a costume that enabled the most successful undercover operation in federal law enforcement history. But its true power wasn't in the disguise. It was in revealing the character of those who believed cruelty was consequence-free. Each sentence represents more than punishment. It's a restoration of dignity to every victim these criminals created, every life they destroyed, every hope they crushed in their pursuit of profit and power. The reckoning is complete. Justice has been served. And the man they thought was broken has proven himself to be the architect of their destruction. 2 years after the trials, Agent Henry Whitmore stands in a small community center in Queens, addressing a group of recent immigrants learning about the American legal system. The marble corridors of Sterling and Associates feel like a lifetime ago, though the lessons learned there remain etched in his memory like scripture. Justice, he tells the assembled group, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has seen both its absence and its restoration, is not always immediate. Sometimes it requires patience that most people cannot fathom, sacrifice that most people cannot make. The community center occupies the former offices of Sarah Kim's illegal practice, a deliberate choice by the federal government to transform a place of exploitation into a sanctuary of legitimate help. Pro bono attorneys now work where once corruption thrived, offering real legal aid to the very communities that Sarah Kim had preyed upon. Among Henry's audience sits Maria Consuela, a 60-year-old woman from El Salvador, whose case was one of Sarah's victims. Her son, Dr. Miguel Consuela, had worked for months to help his mother gain legal status, only to discover that Sarah had stolen their money and never filed the necessary paperwork. "I remember," Maria says during the question period, her English careful but clear, "when the lady lawyer laughed at my fear. She said I was stupid to worry about deportation." Her weathered hands fold in her lap as she continues. "But you, Agent Whitmore, you helped make sure my real case was filed. My son says you made sure I got justice." Henry nods, remembering the recordings of Sarah's cruelty. the documented evidence of her theft from vulnerable families. "Justice delayed," he replies gently, "is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice being prepared with the care it deserves." The irony of his current assignment is not lost on him. After spending 23 years in deep cover operations, the Bureau has assigned him to community outreach. Helping victims of the very corruption network he spent 18 months infiltrating. It's peaceful work, meaningful work, the kind of assignment that feels less like a job and more like redemption. Through the community center's windows, Henry can see the federal courthouse where his tormentors are serving their sentences. Jessica Chen, now 3 years into her 7-year term, works in the prison library teaching literacy to fellow inmates. Her former arrogance has been replaced by something resembling humility, though whether it's genuine repentance or simply the adaptation necessary for survival remains unclear. Brad Wellington's transformation has been more dramatic. His father's death in federal prison 6 months into his sentence seemed to break something fundamental in Brad's character. The golden boy, who once mocked Henry's apparent powerlessness, now spends his days in federal custody, writing letters of apology to victims of his family's corruption. Letters that are forwarded to the FBI, but never sent to their intended recipients. Tyler Morrison has found religion behind bars, though the sincerity of his conversion is debated by those who knew him before. His former law license hangs in Henry's office now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that privilege without character is merely temporary decoration on a fundamentally weak foundation. Sarah Kim's imprisonment has been the most difficult of all the defendants. Her exploitation of immigrant communities has made her a target within the federal prison system, where even hardened criminals view crimes against the vulnerable as particularly despicable. Henry receives periodic reports about her welfare, though he feels no satisfaction in her suffering, only the quiet completion of justice served. "Agent Whitmore," asks Dr. Consuela during the community session, "how did you endure those months of humiliation? How did you maintain your dignity when they treated you with such cruelty?" The question hangs in the air like incense in a cathedral, heavy with meaning that extends far beyond the immediate circumstances. Henry considers his response carefully, understanding that his words will be carried into homes and hearts where similar struggles against humiliation and powerlessness play out daily. "Dignity," he says finally, "is not something that can be taken from you. It can only be surrendered." He pauses, looking around the room at faces marked by their own struggles with injustice and institutional cruelty. Those young lawyers believed they were stripping away my dignity with their mockery. In reality, they were revealing their own lack of character. He moves to the front of the room, his bearing still carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, though now tempered with the wisdom that comes from having voluntarily embraced powerlessness. "True power," Henry continues, "is not the ability to humiliate others. It's the ability to maintain your humanity even when others have lost theirs. It's the strength to serve justice even when justice requires you to accept injustice temporarily." Maria Consuela nods thoughtfully. "Like Jesus in the desert," she murmurs, and Henry smiles at the comparison. "Perhaps, though I had the advantage of knowing that my suffering had a purpose, an end date, a larger mission. Many people face humiliation and cruelty without that certainty, without knowing whether their patience will ever be vindicated." The session continues for another hour, covering practical matters: how to identify legitimate attorneys, how to verify legal credentials, how to recognize the warning signs of exploitation. But the underlying message runs deeper. That dignity is an internal quality that external circumstances cannot touch. That justice may be delayed, but need not be abandoned. That true strength sometimes requires appearing weak. As the community members file out, Dr. Consuela approaches Henry privately. "My mother asks me to give you this," he says, handing Henry a small wooden cross carved from Salvadoran cedar. She made it herself. She says it's for a man who understood sacrifice. Henry accepts the gift with the reverence it deserves, understanding that it represents something more valuable than any federal commendation or professional recognition. It's the acknowledgement of someone who understands suffering transformed into service. Later that evening, Henry walks through Central Park as autumn settles over the city like a comfortable blanket. The trees shed their leaves with the same patient dignity he learned to embrace during his months as a janitor, understanding that apparent death is sometimes necessary for eventual renewal. His phone rings, the sophisticated federal device he carries now, not the cheap prepaid model that connected him to his handlers during the operation. The caller ID shows Director Crawford's name. Henry. The director's voice carries satisfaction and something that might be affection. The Senate Intelligence Committee wants to brief you on a new assignment. Deep cover again, this time focusing on corruption in federal contracting. Interested? Henry pauses beside the reservoir, watching runners circle the water with determined rhythm. Once, he would have accepted immediately, drawn by the challenge and the importance of the mission. Now, he considers the question with different priorities. How long? He asks. Minimum 3 years, possibly 5. It would require you to disappear again, build another identity, sacrifice another piece of your life for the greater good. Henry watches a young father teaching his daughter to feed ducks at the water's edge. The girl's laughter carries across the water like church bells, pure and joyful and uncomplicated. Somewhere in federal prison, Jessica Chen is learning to live without such simple pleasures, while Tyler Morrison contemplates the wreckage of a family dynasty he helped destroy. Director, Henry says finally, I think my deep cover days are behind me, but I'd be honored to train the next generation of agents who might need to walk that path. The conversation continues for a few more minutes, covering logistics and timelines and the bureaucratic mechanics of career transition. But Henry's attention drifts to the families around him, the ordinary people living ordinary lives without the weight of deception and sacrifice that has defined his adult existence. After the call ends, Henry sits on a park bench as darkness settles over the city. The wooden cross from Maria Consuela rests in his pocket, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are measured not in enemies defeated, but in dignity maintained. Not in power exercised, but in service rendered. The janitor's uniform served its purpose and has been retired to FBI storage. The false identity has been discarded like a costume after the final performance, but the lessons learned during those months of apparent powerlessness remain. That true strength is often invisible, that justice may require personal sacrifice, and that the deepest victories are won not through dominance, but through service. In federal prisons across the country, 4 former lawyers serve sentences for crimes they committed while believing themselves untouchable. Their downfall stands as testimony to the ancient truth that pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. But Henry Whitmore's real victory is not their imprisonment. It's the community center in Queens, where immigrants learn about legitimate legal help, the training academy where new agents learn about patience and sacrifice, the quiet knowledge that justice, however delayed, can still be served with dignity and grace. The man they mocked as powerless has proven that true power lies not in the ability to humiliate others, but in the strength to transform suffering into service, mockery into mission, and temporary defeat into permanent victory. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living well. Sometimes the deepest justice is helping others find their own. If this story touched you, share in the comments what moved you most, and send this video to someone who needs to hear that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered, and that true power often wears the humblest disguise.